Hi, Cinex Movies again. Morbius 2022 features a man who is determined to cure the disease which has plagued him his entire life with an experiment which carries unexpected circumstances. Relax and enjoy this action-packed superhero film based on Marvel Comics. A helicopter conveying Dr. Michael Morbius and a team of men stop in a jungle for the doc to carry out an experiment on bats, using his own blood after slitting his palm with a sharp object. The doctor's blood is sensed in bats and their large numbers troop out. Dr. Michael Morbius is a biochemist with a rare blood disease who is resolute on finding a cure to his condition. About 25 years earlier in Greece, Lucien is brought into this school facility which has a care home attached with his crutches and is introduced to Michael, his bedside neighbor. Michael would rather call him Milo than Lucien, and Lucien was absolutely fine with it. Milo asks how long Michael has been here, and he says as long as he can remember. But he isn't cured yet, says Milo, and Michael explains there's no cure, that there's something missing in their DNA, like a piece of a puzzle, and until they find it, all they have to do is stay alive. Milo, out of curiosity, asks Michael what he would do if he could be normal, but Michael says he doesn't think about it. A little while after Michael says he and Milo were the few amongst the many, Milo passes out and Michael quickly picks his pen to fix something in the machine connected to Milo, and Milo regains his consciousness within seconds. The man in charge of the care home explains to Michael that it took a team of scientists to build that machine and Michael was able to fix it with just his pen. The man further goes ahead to tell Michael that there's a school for gifted children in New York and he thinks he can get them to cover his tuition and provide private care to help manage Michael's condition. Somewhere he can study, learn, and own his skills. The man says Michael has a gift and he doesn't think he can forgive himself if he lets it go to waste. Michael is worried about Milo, but the man says he'll take care of him cause Milo needs him. Michael writes a letter to Milo with a promise to find a cure for them, but before he could realize, the wind tosses the paper. Milo comes outside for it and he meets a group of ill-mannered boys who were simply just bullies who wouldn't return his letter to him. This forces him to hit one of them with his crutch and the other kids pounce on him until the man in charge of the care home comes to his rescue. Fast forward to now, Michael Morbius completed his doctorate degree by 19 and quickly established himself in the world's leading authority on blood-borne diseases. His development of artificial blood has saved more lives than penicillin and he is being awarded. Dr. Martine, his assistant and love interest in the hospital he manages, requests for a minute with Dr. Morbius while he attends to a patient who happens to be a jovial child. Dr. Martine says he's pushing himself too much and asks if his benefactor knows what he does at the lab, mixing human DNA with bad DNA. Turns out Dr. Morbius is keeping a number of bats in his lab and Dr. Martine got to find out through his passcode. Dr. Martine mentions Dr. Morbius could lose his license for this, but he says he wouldn't be needing it soon anyway, but she on the other hand would. Dr. Morbius says bats are the only mammals on Earth that feed exclusively on blood, and so in order to drink it, they produce unique anticoagulants. So he believes if he is able to infuse these vampires' blood into his body would produce the unique anticoagulants that would be a cure. Dr. Martine is worried about what the cost could be, but Dr. Morbius is optimistic that if they don't push the boundaries and take the risks, and without that, there is no science, no medicine, nor breakthroughs. Dr. Morbius then takes his combination and injects it into a lab rat, but the specimen passes out before they could realize, leaving disappointment written all over his face. Dr. Martine says she doesn't want to see Dr. Morbius get hurt, but he says he should have died long ago, but he's still alive, and that's to fix this and save his best friend, Milo, and everyone else like them. Just as they attend to the little girl in their clinic, Dr. Martine notices the lab rat is still alive and she announces to Dr. Morbius that it worked. Dr. Morbius visits his friend Milo, who is being attended to by his physician, Dr. Nicholas. Dr. Morbius tells Milo that he has some good news and they should go for a walk. Milo opines love isn't something for people like them, and he ought to be careful around Dr. Martine. Dr. Morbius tells Milo that he is close and the cure is finally possible, although still experimental and expensive. He manages to convince Milo that it's worth trying since they don't have much time left, and Milo accepts the challenge. Dr. Morbius and Martine are on a seaboard with some men on the other side of the ship. His experiment reads stable, which means it's a success. He lets Martine inject him with a portion into his spine and buckle him up to prepare for whatever is next. A man walks into the lab carrying a gun and teasing Dr. Martine, but she instructs him to get out. They notice Dr. Morbius is no longer on the sit he was tied to, and they become alert. They both walk into the lab and Dr. Martine notices Dr. Michael is attached to the ceiling in the lab and instructs the man with her not to shoot, but he wouldn't listen as he's scared of seeing a monster. He tries to shoot, but Dr. Morbius attacks him swiftly and this forces Dr. Martine to run out of the sectioned lab and lock it. Dr. Martine tries to calm this monstrous creature, and just when he is a bit calm, the alarm starts to ring and this makes Dr. Morbius quite hostile. The other men armed with their guns walk into the lab, but while she tries to stop them from shooting Dr. Morbius, they hit her down, leaving her unconscious. Dr. Morbius breaks his way through the well-secured sectioned lab, and upon sighting Martine lying unconscious on the ground, he gets really hostile and kills all of them in the lab, with a few left outside the lab, and they quickly close the place, wondering what sort of a thing they had just seen. Oh well, the door doesn't stop him, as he breaks through the metal door, easily angered by the idea that Dr. Martine is lying unconscious on the floor. Neither the men nor their guns are able to stop Dr. Morbius, only Dr. Martine is the survivor from that ship. Dr. Morbius recovers to his former self, and he notices some changes in his body, as his muscles are now well pronounced and he can now walk well without his crutches. He sees the footage of his gruesome killings while he was under the influence, and he is filled with terror and regrets. He immediately reports the situation and jets off the ship, taking his experiment along. The FBI arrives and they discover someone called for an emergency, but it wasn't Dr. Martine, and she is still unconscious from the hit on her head. Dr. Morbius visits the hospital she's being admitted to and apologizes to her, assuring she was going to be okay. Dr. Morbius documents his experiment, and as a result of Dr. Morbius' procedure, he has an overwhelming urge to consume blood, human blood. For the first time in his entire life, he feels so good. He has enormous strength upon consuming blood, doing things he never imagined before, more like a superhuman. Dr. Morbius feels kinship with the creatures he kept in his lab. They would tear anyone else apart, but they welcome him this time like a brother. But the problem is, he doesn't know how to control it. Artificial blood keeps him stable for roughly 6 hours, but that window is growing shorter. The question is, what if there is no artificial blood? What happens? He locks himself up in a transparent shield to see what could happen. His vitals begin to drop, and he becomes quite desperate. He thinks of a solution to either drink the artificial blood or die. He promises himself that whatever happened on that ship will not happen again. Dr. Morbius seems to have everything under control, but Milo's visit to Dr. Morbius' lab is about to make every single thing go awry. Milo meets Dr. Morbius in a very desperate state for blood, and he signals to Milo to get him blood from the freezer. Milo sees Dr. Morbius is now strong and begs him to give the same thing to him, but Dr. Morbius says he made a mistake and cannot give it to him. Milo still begs him, but Mr. Morbius instead yells at him to get out of the lab. This makes Milo look so scared. Agent Stroud and Rodriguez visit Dr. Martine at the hospital, who is now conscious. But she denies remembering whatever happened at the lab that night. One of the nurses at Dr. Morbius' facility is attacked and drained of her blood. Dr. Morbius, upon seeing this, is worried and tries to get away until he is interrupted by the FBI agents. After interrogations, they try to arrest him, but he violently escapes from them through the rooftop, but Agent Stroud is able to stop him and lock him up. Agent Stroud found a paper made bad on that ship that was under attack, and shows it to Dr. Morbius. They say they can understand the death of those men on that ship, but why would he kill the nurse who has worked with him for 7 years or so? But Dr. Morbius says he cannot answer that. Dr. Morbius begins to feel unstable again. He apologizes to the agents and requests for the bag of blood he left on the rooftop, but they wouldn't give him. They say it's for evidence. He says he's starting to feel hungry, and they wouldn't like to see him hungry. A jailer announces to Dr. Morbius that his lawyer was here. It turns out to be Milo. Milo says they need to get him out by any possible means, and he believes Dr. Morbius wouldn't kill anyone. Soon the jailer announces that it was time for Milo to go. Milo drops a pint of blood for Dr. Morbius to sustain him, and as he walks out of the cell, he leaves his walking stick. And Dr. Morbius is able to deduce that Milo took that specimen he didn't want him to. Dr. Morbius gets really upset and breaks his way through the window of the cell with his bare fist. He appears to be getting away, but he is only trying to stop Milo. Milo confesses to killing the nurse and tells Morbius there's so much they could do now. Dr. Morbius says he was only trying to protect him from being a monster like himself, but Milo would lend an ear. He says he's looked up to Dr. Morbius his whole life, and he will not let Morbius take him back to what he used to be. Some policemen try to stop and arrest Dr. Morbius and Milo, but Milo ends up killing every one of them, and this doesn't sit down well with the doctor. Agent Stroud and Rodriguez get to the scene where the policemen were murdered, and while Rodriguez says this is unforgivable, Stroud says to keep their eyes on Dr. Martine. Dr. Martine runs away from the FBI and meets with Dr. Morbius, who is undercover, and asks for her help to stop Milo, who took the serum. Dr. Morbius snatches a laboratory from a group of boys so he can find a cure to he and Milo's condition. Dr. Martine visits the lab to get what Dr. Morbius would need, but is intercepted by Milo. Milo asks for Dr. Morbius' whereabouts from Dr. Martine, but she says she doesn't know. Just to be sure, he asks again and she declines knowing. He leaves her alone, but this is only for a while. The police raid Dr. Martine's home, but she is nowhere to be found along with her kitten. She's in the lab with Dr. Morbius, as he's on a research to find a cure. She gets cut trying to feed her cat, and this stirs Dr. Morbius up. Martine brings him back to his senses with a tap. He apologizes and requests she cover up the wound. Dr. Morbius and Martine later share a passionate kiss at the rooftop, with Milo watching from a distance with disgust written all over his face. There's another casualty, but this time, the CCTV footage shows it's not the doctor. The one doctor who has taken care of Milo all his life pays a visit to Milo to proffer a solution, but he ends up being wounded badly. Dr. Morbius creates an anticoagulant to inject himself with. Any moment from now he's going to feel the urge to take human blood. He asks Martine to leave, as it wouldn't be safe any moment from now. Dr. Nicholas calls Morbius and charges him with the responsibility of stopping Milo before he took his last breath. Dr. Morbius has abilities to hear from a far distance, and he senses Martine is in trouble. Turns out Milo attacked her, and now she allows Morbius to take her blood so he can fight Milo. Milo gets assistance from his bad brothers and is able to inject Milo with the anticoagulant serum he created, sending him to his death. Thanks for your time. Remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as this would be helpful.